So I get all the comments from our YouTube videos, they pop up right here on my phone, and one of them really stood out. This guy named Onemoremisfit has this really long, well thought out comment. I mean, I just love it. He's explaining why he's asking the question. He's stating that he's in Illinois, and so it's really relevant to him. And he says, I just want to understand my rights. I just want to understand what the law is and how this should work if I'm ever in this situation with law enforcement. I love that. And that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain exactly my take on his question. I would like to see advice on not just what to do after I've been charged with DUI, but how to best conduct myself during the traffic stop and police interaction before the arrest to increase the possibility of a favorable outcome, and how not to make decisions that will damage my case further than what was unavoidable. Of course, the best policy is to never drink and drive. To that end, I'm 63 years old and never had a DUI. I haven't even had a moving violation in 20 years. I don't drink much. I literally drink 2 beers twice a year. I'm only thinking about the contingency for what if. So essentially, Onemoremisfit is asking how to conduct himself, and importantly, how not to conduct himself if he's ever stopped and being investigated for DUI. He specifies that he lives in Illinois and even drives in the counties in which we practice. This is really important because the DUI laws and traffic laws are different in every state. So you only want to listen to somebody who practices in the area in which you drive. So when we're talking about a DUI investigation, it's important to know that there's actually 3 phases to that investigation. We're gonna go through each one of them, and I think it's helpful to think of these as you try to answer the question of how you would or should conduct yourself during an investigation. So the first one is called vehicle in motion. And this is simply what the officer observes. Does he see you speeding, swerving? What is the reason that they're pulling you over in the first place? Now, there's not much you can do. You oftentimes don't even know that you're being followed by a police officer. So this one sort of is what it is. Phase 2 is called personal contact. Everyone's experienced this. This is where the officer comes up, asks you for your license and registration, maybe asks you why he pulled you over. Those things that an officer does when they stop a vehicle. So what the officer is oftentimes looking for is clues of impairment, right? Things like bloodshot, glassy eyes, slurred speech, strong odor of alcohol, confusion, right? When you're looking for your papers and things. In fact, the officers even have a way of doing this. It's called divided attention tests. You don't even know what's happening. But while they have you looking in your wallet for your license, they're going to ask you a separate question. They're going to divide your attention 2 different ways. And the idea is that somebody who's consumed alcohol or under the influence of drugs is going to have a harder time dividing their attention among those 2 things than if they were sober. So now let's talk about what you can do in this scenario. You know, if you're stone sober and you're not worried about a DUI in any way, then, you know, you may want to consider answering those questions. However, if you're not quite sure, you've had a few drinks or something like that, then you're probably going to want to be quiet. You're going to want to say less. Now, you are required to give them your license and registration, but you're not required to do much else than that. You're not required to answer where you're coming from or where you're going. You're not required to tell them sort of where you've been all night and give them the whole timeline. You can simply stay quiet, or you can say, hey, I'm not going to discuss my day. I'm not going to talk without my lawyer present. During this personal contact phase, the officer is looking for those clues. And what they're going to determine is, do they now have a reasonable suspicion that this driver is under the influence of drugs or alcohol? That's a determination that an officer needs to make. And oftentimes they don't make that determination correctly. Oftentimes they'll walk into this traffic stop with a bias or with a preconceived notion, and they will simply find clues to confirm that. Other times they are right, and they want to continue and further pursue this investigation. This next phase is called the pre-arrest screening, and this basically begins when the officer says, can you step out of the car? Now, you are required to get out of the car in that scenario, but you are not required to do pretty much anything that comes after that. Interestingly, Onemoremisfit says that he knows not to do the field sobriety tests, but in my experience, most people do not realize that they can and should refuse those tests. Most people believe that they're under some sort of obligation to do them. But let's stop and think about that. How can you be obligated to stand on one leg? How can you be obligated to take 9 steps and turn around? You can simply say no. In fact, even if I stone sober and hadn't had a single drink, I personally would never do those field sobriety tests. They're just not worth it. Again, an officer is going to see what they want to see. They're going to confirm that suspicion that they already established in phase 2. Now, the officer is going to tell you that once you do these and you're all good to go, we're going to let you be on your way. Now, that almost never happens. Again, an officer is confirming what they already believe to be the case. So after the field sobriety test, oftentimes the officer is going to request what's called a portable breath test. We call it a PBT. It's just a little handheld breathalyzer that they're going to ask you to blow into. This is not admissible in court. A portable breath test is not up to the standards that it can even be admitted into court. So why do they do that? Well, once again, an officer is confirming his suspicion. In fact, he's building towards creating probable cause to make the arrest. And so if you do this breathalyzer and you are over the legal limit, well, it's pretty clear that then the officer had probable cause to arrest you. However, if you refuse that breath test, not only is there no penalty, because it's not admissible in court, but also there's still some doubt as to whether or not the officer really had probable cause. So just like the field sobriety tests, there is no downside and there's only upside to refusing the portable breath test. So when we watch the videos of a DUI arrest, we will see an officer ask 1,000,000 times, how much have you had to drink, right? In variations of that. How much have you smoked? Have you consumed any drugs? Tell me, you just had a couple beers? What did you do? Right? They're going to play good cop. They're going to play bad cop. They're going to do everything they can to get that admission out of you. The reason for that is because your admission confirms that they had reasonable suspicion of a DUI in the first place, that they had probable cause to make an arrest in the first place. Your admission verifies their actions. So, what is an admission? Well, oftentimes people are coerced or coaxed into admitting to having just a few drinks. I just had 2, or it was a few hours ago, right? That is going to be seen in his admission, right? Like the officer doesn't believe you that you had 2. A judge and jury may not believe you that you had 2. That you should consider to be an admission because everyone around you considers that to be an admission. So instead, people are typically better off by denying consuming anything at all or simply not answering the questions. Simply saying, I'm not going to answer any questions without my lawyer present. So Onemoremisfit is smart enough to pick up on this. He says that in today's environment, zero tolerance climate, when a cop asks if you've been drinking, the correct answer is a polite firm no. There can't be any nuanced explanation because anything less than a flat out no will be considered an admission. And he's right that practically speaking in court, any sort of nuance, well, I drank a few hours ago or I just only had this amount is going to be considered an admission and used against you in court. After a brief 20-minute observation period, an officer is going to ask you to do the breathalyzer test again. But this one is different. This is what we call the evidentiary test. This is back at the police station and it's a much bigger breathalyzer unit. So that's a key indicator here. The bigger units back at the station are certified to a much more higher level. So this one is admissible in court. That's why it's called evidentiary. It is evidence to be used against you in court. And so this is really the breathalyzer that people are talking about when they say, well, should I take it? Should I not take it? This is the one that matters. And I have created so many videos and talked so many times on whether or not you should take this breathalyzer test. Every scenario is different. There is no one size fits all answer, but you should know that this will be used in court against you. And so I want to go through the scenarios that were posed in this comment. Number one is you've had literally nothing to drink and the cop is just plain wrong. Should you take that breathalyzer test? Again, it's up to you. I can't answer that question for you. There is an argument to say, yeah, let me take that and prove that I am 0.0000. And that may be what I would do in that scenario if I am absolutely certain I have not drank anything within the last few days. But that doesn't mean you're out of the woods. I have filing cabinets full of cases where even after the person blows a .000, what does the officer do? He turns his attention and says, well, then you must be on drugs, right? Because again, this officer already has their suspicions. In fact, this officer is already knee deep in it. They've made an arrest for DUI. And so they'll turn their attention to drugs. And now they're gonna want a blood test. They're gonna want a urine test. They're gonna look for anything they can do to justify what they just did, which is pull you off the road and make an arrest. Scenario number 2 is you had just 2 drinks a few hours ago and you don't feel over the legal limit, but you wouldn't bet on it. Now, this is the trickiest of scenarios. This is where, you may have had all the right intentions. You may have actually had only 2 beers. You may have had a glass of wine or 2 at dinner, and now you're driving home. You feel fine. This isn't a scenario where you feel like you shouldn't be on the road, but that breathalyzer is probably not going to be .000, right? So what do? In this scenario, I personally would refuse the breathalyzer test. You do not know what your blood alcohol concentration is. I have seen 1 drink put people over the legal limits. There are so many factors in terms of body composition, what you've eaten, what you drank, time that has elapsed. Alcohol metabolizes in the body at different rates. And you just don't know what your blood alcohol concentration is. And I personally would err on the side of caution and refuse the breathalyzer test. So scenario number 3 is that you're over the legal limit and you know it. Now, I have to tell you that you should not have been driving. Do not drink and drive. Made the poor choice to get behind the wheel, and here you are. So let's walk through whether or not you should do the breathalyzer test in this scenario. An officer is going to tell you that if you refuse it, you will have a longer suspension of your driver's license, and that is true. A refusal for a first-time DUI results in a 12-month suspension of your license. If you take that test and you are over the legal limit, then it's going to result in a 6-month suspension of your license here in Illinois. So that's how they get you to do it, right? However, there's 2 things that you need to know. If you refuse that test, you have a better chance of overturning the suspension overall, right? You have an argument to make that this officer was wrong, that they didn't have a reasonable suspicion, that there was not probable cause to make this arrest because they have no actual breathalyzer test to show that they did have probable cause. So you can begin to argue sort of what some of those other clues were during those other earlier phases, explain them away, and possibly overturn your suspension entirely. Benefit number 2 in refusing a breathalyzer is that in court, they're going to have to prove that you were too intoxicated to safely operate the vehicle. If you did take the breathalyzer and you are over the legal limit, then you are considered to be legally drunk. It doesn't matter how drunk you actually were, you are legally drunk. And that is all that needs to be proven in order to convict you of this DUI. So our clients have found that the benefits of refusing that breathalyzer often outweigh the negative of having a longer suspension. Onemoremisfit also says that he's seen cops can charge someone for DUI even when they're sober in some cases. He's absolutely right. Now, an officer is in an unfortunate position too, right? This is just 2 humans interacting, and this is prone to mistakes, especially when the officer approaches that window with a preconceived bias, right? He believes that this person's under the influence. Maybe it's based on the way they were driving or something else that he observed. But now he's at the window talking to this driver, and it's only human for people to want to confirm the things they already believe. And in fact, even when there's a breathalyzer test, or even when someone performs well on a field sobriety tests, we often see the officers continue with that arrest. Because again, they already have a belief, and it's really hard for a person to immediately change their beliefs and admit that they were wrong. Let's talk for a minute about things you shouldn't do when you're being investigated for a DUI. Now, we could make a whole video on this. There's a ton of things you shouldn't do, and you see them all the time on these videos. However, the one point I want to make is that an officer has a difficult job, right? They're on the side of the road talking with somebody. It's a dangerous situation. And so people often misinterpret this. People often want to be rude or jerks to the police officer. And I have literally never seen that work out well for somebody. There is a way to say, officer, respectfully, I'm not going to answer your questions without my lawyer present, versus being a jerk. You have to learn that difference. You have to know that balance. And our clients who can figure out that balance and be respectful but quiet are going to turn out better than the ones who are jerks to the officers. So I want to thank Onemoremisfit for this awesome comment. In fact, when I saw it, I thought, like, this guy's got to be law enforcement or a lawyer or something, because it is really well thought out and really well written. I think you guys can all learn a lot from the comment alone. So that's why I decided to make this video. I hope that you learned a little bit about how to conduct yourself if you're in this scenario. However, I have to tell you in closing that you should not drink and drive. This can all be avoided by exercising good judgment after you've had that first drink. Thanks for watching.